I used to believe my life was simple, predictable, and safe. My days moved in quiet patterns, the kind that leave no space for surprises. I would wake, prepare meals, clean, and watch the hours pass as if they belonged to someone else. My husband was often away, buried in work, present only in routine ways, his love steady but uninspired. I told myself that this was enough, that marriage was meant to settle into calm waters after the storms of passion had passed. But inside, I longed for something I didn't dare name, a spark that might remind me that I was more than just a wife in the background of a man's life. It was in this stillness that he returned home. My husband's son, grown now, his presence shifting the air of the house in ways I had not expected. He carried the energy of youth, yet tempered with a quiet maturity that seemed beyond his years. His voice carried confidence, his laughter felt unguarded, and the way he noticed small things, the placement of a dish, the tiredness in my eyes, was unlike the indifference I had grown used to. He did not belong to me, and yet his presence unsettled me, as if something forbidden had quietly slipped into the corners of my life. One afternoon, as I moved about in the kitchen, he lingered nearby, leaning casually against the counter as if he had nowhere else to be. He asked about the food, then about small memories of when he was younger. His tone was light, but his eyes seemed to study me carefully, not as a child looking at a parent, but as a man trying to understand a woman. I felt his gaze, steady and curious, and though I forced myself to focus on the simple task before me, my hands trembled in ways I prayed he wouldn't notice. The conversation drifted unexpectedly. He asked about my past, about the choices I had made before meeting his father. His words were casual, but beneath them was something deeper, something probing. I laughed softly, trying to brush it off, but inside my chest there was a sudden quickening. No one had asked me about that part of myself in so long. My husband never did, and I had stopped expecting it. Yet here he was, looking at me not as an invisible shadow, but as if there were stories within me worth hearing. The air between us grew thick with unspoken things. I could feel it, though nothing improper had been said, nothing had been done. It was the silence between his questions, the way his eyes held mine a fraction longer than they should. A warmth spread in my chest that I tried to smother with reason. He was my stepson. I was his father's wife. There were boundaries that could never be crossed. And yet, standing there with the faintest trace of his attention resting on me, I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. That day marked the beginning of something I could not undo. I told myself it was harmless, that it was only curiosity, nothing more. But deep inside, I knew better. A door had quietly opened, and behind it, a flame had begun to flicker. And once it caught, I feared it might never go out. The days that followed were filled with moments I could not name yet could not ignore. They were small, ordinary pieces of life that somehow felt altered when he was near. At the dinner table, his laughter carried a brightness that pulled me toward it, while my husband's silence sat heavy, predictable, and tired. In the living room, a casual glance exchanged across the space felt sharper than it should, like a spark striking flint. Passing him in the hallway, my arm would brush his just slightly, and though the touch was nothing, the awareness it left behind lingered longer than it should. I began to notice the way he spoke to me was different. He did not rush through words the way most young men did, distracted by their own worlds. Instead, he listened. He asked how I felt, what I thought, and his questions carried weight as if my answers mattered. I found myself speaking more freely with him than I ever had with his father. One evening, he admitted quietly that he often felt like a stranger in his own home, that his father's distance left him hungry for connection. I listened, and when I told him I, too, often felt unseen, something unspoken passed between us, binding us in a secret we had not intended to share. That shared loneliness became a language of its own. I caught myself waiting for him to come home, listening for the sound of his footsteps, feeling a strange emptiness when the house was silent without him. When I cooked, I wondered if he would notice the flavors, if he would praise the meal in that gentle way that felt far too personal. When I dressed, I became aware of how I looked, not for my husband, but for him, though I hated myself for the thought. The shift between us deepened slowly, in gestures that outsiders would have dismissed. The way his gaze lingered on my face when I spoke, the softness in his tone when he said my name, the accidental brush of his fingers when he handed me something. each moment pressed against a line neither of us dared to acknowledge out loud. I told myself it was my imagination, that I was inventing meaning where none existed, but every fiber of me knew the truth. One night, the house was quiet, the kind of silence that makes every sound louder. He stayed behind in the kitchen after dinner, leaning close as I dried the dishes. His voice dropped, softer than usual, as he asked if I ever felt like life had cheated me out of something. The question lodged itself deep inside me. I could have dismissed it, could have laughed, but instead I felt my throat tighten. I wanted to answer, but the truth was too dangerous. My silence must have said enough, because his eyes darkened, his gaze fixed on me with an intensity that left me unsteady. In that moment, the world felt suspended, as though everything we had built our lives upon, the rules, the expectations, the roles we were meant to play, were nothing but fragile glass. One word, one touch, could shatter it all. I turned away, pretending to busy myself, but my heart pounded with a truth I could no longer deny. We had stepped too close to a fire neither of us should have lit, and yet neither of us wanted to walk away. The tension that had been building between us could not remain hidden forever. It lived in every glance, every pause, every silence that stretched too long. I tried to convince myself it was only imagination, that nothing real existed between us, but my body betrayed me each time he entered the room. The air grew heavier, my heart beat louder, and I began to dread and crave his presence in equal measure. One evening, the house felt unusually still. My husband was away on yet another late night at work, and the quiet carried its own kind of weight. He stayed behind after dinner, offering to help as I cleaned, though I knew he had no reason to. His closeness unsettled me, the nearness of him too much and yet not enough. As I turned to place a dish aside, his hand brushed against mine. It was nothing, a fleeting touch, but I didn't move away. For the first time, I let it linger, and in that tiny pause, something unspoken passed between us, undeniable and irreversible. He didn't speak at first. He simply looked at me, his eyes searching mine as though waiting for permission, or perhaps waiting for me to stop him. I should have stepped back, created distance, reminded us both of who we were meant to be. But I stood frozen, caught between fear and a hunger I hadn't felt in years. My breath trembled as the silence stretched, and I realized I wanted him to break it. When he finally did, his words were soft, almost hesitant. He confessed that he couldn't stop thinking about me, that he tried to push the thoughts away but they returned every time we were near. My heart clenched, torn between shock and the painful relief of hearing aloud what I had secretly known. I whispered his name, not in anger, not in warning, but as if to silence the storm that had already begun. He stepped closer, his voice barely above a breath, telling me he saw me in ways no one else did, that I wasn't invisible, that I was more than just a shadow in someone else's life. I wanted to deny it, to tell him this was wrong, but the words never formed. Instead, I whispered back the truth I had buried, that I felt alive only in these moments, that I didn't want him to stop. The confession left me trembling, exposed, but in his eyes, I saw no judgment, only the reflection of my own need. Our closeness left no space for pretense. His hand reached for mine again, this time deliberate, and I let my fingers rest in his. The warmth of his touch sent waves through me, undoing years of restraint. His face was only inches from mine now, his breath mingling with mine, and though every voice of reason screamed for distance, my body leaned closer. The world outside ceased to exist. Our lips never fully met in that moment, but the space between them vanished into a silence more intimate than any touch. I knew then that the line we had clung to was gone. We had crossed into something that could never be taken back, a secret flame lit in the quiet of the night, burning brightly against everything we had once believed unshakable. From that moment forward, nothing would ever be the same. The morning after felt strangely ordinary, as if the world itself had chosen to ignore what had happened in the silence of the night. The sun streamed through the windows, the clatter of breakfast plates filled the kitchen, and yet beneath the surface, everything had changed. I moved about quietly, pretending to be unaffected, but every glance toward him carried the weight of a memory I could not erase. My husband sat at the table, oblivious, reading the newspaper, sipping his coffee, while across from him his son and I exchanged silent looks that said more than words ever could. Guilt settled heavy in my chest, but it was not enough to drown the new awareness alive inside me. Each time our eyes met, a wave of remembrance washed over me. I tried to bury it beneath routine, but it surfaced everywhere. In the way he held open a door for me, in the way he lingered in the room when no one else noticed. We had crossed into dangerous territory, and yet neither of us seemed willing to step back. The secret bound us, a thread of fire weaving through even the most ordinary hours. Days passed, and the quiet flame grew stronger, though hidden from the world. We learned to speak without speaking, to touch without touching. A brush of hands as a glass was passed, a smile too long, a word spoken with a softness that no one else could hear. Each moment fed the hunger, but it also fed the fear. Every time my husband's eyes lingered on me, I felt the panic rise. Did he sense it? Did he know? And yet he remained distant, too absorbed in his own distractions to notice the storm unraveling just beneath his roof. Inside me, a war raged. I told myself I was destroying everything, that one discovery could shatter not just a marriage but a family. And still, the memory of his words, his touch, his gaze, those things pulsed through me with a force I could not resist. For years, I had felt invisible, an afterthought in my own life, and suddenly here was someone who saw me completely, who reminded me of the woman I once was before time dulled her edges. Was it betrayal, or was it survival? Was I unfaithful, or was I simply reaching for the pieces of myself I thought I had lost? There were nights when I lay awake beside my husband, my body still, my mind elsewhere. I would hear faint footsteps in the hallway, and though no words were spoken, I knew he was awake too, restless, carrying the same weight I bore. We avoided what we both wanted most, because to give in again meant stepping deeper into a fire that could burn everything we held. But desire does not vanish, it hides, waiting for the moment it cannot be denied. Looking back, I cannot define it in simple terms. It was more than lust, though desire burned at its core. It was more than affection, though care and tenderness shaped it. It was something dangerous, something that blurred the lines between love and ruin. Infidelity is often spoken of as a betrayal, a selfish indulgence. But sometimes, it is the awakening of a heart long forgotten, a reminder that life is fleeting and that even the forbidden can feel achingly alive. The flame remains, hidden in silence, buried beneath duty and fear. And though the world may never know, I carry it with me still, that secret fire that once illuminated the darkest corners of my life. For secrets may be hidden, but they never die, they burn quietly, waiting for the moment they are remembered.